Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast, ancient forest, the kind where the trees whisper secrets that have been held for centuries, their branches intertwining like the threads of forgotten dreams. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and as the sun filters through the canopy in golden shards, you feel a pull, a subtle, insistent tug towards something deeper within. This is where we begin our journey today, into the heart of Carl Jung's most profound mystery, the secret of true integration. Not just any integration, but the kind that reshapes your very soul, aligning the fragments of who you are into a wholeness that radiates power and peace. And here's the question that lingers like fog in the morning light. When does it truly begin? For you, in this unfolding year of 2026, it might be closer than you think, hidden in the shadows you've long ignored, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Picture Jung himself, that enigmatic Swiss psychiatrist, sitting in his study by Lake Zurich back in the early 20th century, his pipe smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling as he pores over notebooks filled with sketches of mandalas and archetypal symbols. He wasn't just a thinker, he was explorer of the human psyche, diving into depths that most of us fear to even glimpse. Jung believed that within each of us lies a divided self, a conscious ego that struts through the daylight world, confident and composed, and then there's the shadow, that murky underbelly of repressed desires, fears, and instincts we've shoved away because they don't fit the polished image we present to the world. But his secret, the one that echoes through his writings like a distant thunder, is that true integration doesn't start with grand revelations or sudden enlightenment. No, it begins in the quiet confrontations, the moments when you stop running from that shadow and turn to face it, inviting it into the light. As we step further into this narrative, let's wander back to Jung's own life, where this secret first took root, not in theory, but in the raw turmoil of his personal breakdown. It was around 1913, a time when the world itself seemed on the brink of fracture, with the looming shadow of the Great War. Jung, then in his late 30s, found himself unraveling. His collaboration with Freud had shattered, leaving him isolated, questioning everything he thought he knew about the mind. Nights blurred into days as visions assaulted him. Floods engulfing Europe, rivers of blood, ancient figures rising from the depths of his unconscious. He could have dismissed them as madness, sought refuge in the rational structures of his profession, but instead, he leaned in. He began what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, documenting every image, every emotion in what would become the Red Book, a tome of illuminated manuscripts that feels more like a medieval grimoire than a psychologist's journal. In those pages, Jung met his shadow not as an enemy, but as a guide, a part of himself that held the keys to wholeness. And here's where the emotional rhythm quickens. Imagine the vulnerability of that. A man of intellect surrendering to the chaos within, painting his nightmares into existence, dialoguing with phantoms that mirrored his deepest flaws, arrogance, doubt, untamed passions. It wasn't comfortable. It was terrifying, exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff into an abyss, trusting that wings would form on the way down. As we weave this thread into your own timeline, consider 2026 not as some distant future, but as the canvas where your integration could paint its masterpiece. The world around us is accelerating, technologies blurring the lines between real and virtual, societies grappling with divisions that mirror our inner splits. Perhaps you felt it already, that subtle discord within, the job that drains your spirit while your dreams gather dust, the relationships that echo old wounds you thought were healed, the quiet dissatisfaction that creeps in during sleepless nights. Jung's secret whispers that true integration begins not when everything aligns perfectly, but when you acknowledge the misalignment, when you allow the discomfort to speak. Think of it as a slow dawn breaking over a stormy sea. The waves crash wildly at first, but as light spreads, patterns emerge, revealing hidden currents that have shaped your path all along. In my own reflections as a storyteller, I've seen this play out in countless lives, including glimmers of my own. Those pivotal moments where ignoring the shadow led to repeated cycles of pain, but facing it sparked transformations that felt almost alchemical. Let's delve deeper into the mechanics of this secret, not as dry analysis, but as a living tapestry unfolding before your eyes. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society, polished and acceptable, like an actor on a stage reciting lines that please the audience.
But beneath that lies the anima or animus, the contrasexual archetype that embodies the opposite gender within us, carrying qualities we've disowned. For a man, it might be the tender, intuitive side suppressed in favor of stoic strength. For a woman, the assertive, logical force muted by expectations of nurturing grace. Integration, Jung posited, starts when these elements begin to dialogue, when the ego stops dominating and listens to the whispers from the depths. Imagine a scene from a film. A lone figure in a dimly lit room, staring into a mirror that reflects not just their face, but shifting forms. Fierce warriors, gentle muses, shadowy beasts, all vying for recognition. The air hums with tension, the soundtrack swelling with orchestral strings that build anticipation. And in that moment, the character chooses not to shatter the glass, but to extend a hand, inviting the reflections to step through. Now, transpose this to your 2026 horizon. By then, perhaps the cultural shifts we've glimpsed, movements toward mental health awareness, the rise of psychedelic therapies echoing Jung's own explorations, will have ripened into tools for your personal odyssey. But the secret isn't in waiting for external permission. It begins in the now, with small acts of courage that compound over time. Recall a time when you felt fragmented, maybe last year or even yesterday. That argument where old resentments bubbled up unbidden, or the creative impulse you stifled because it felt too risky. Jung would say that's your shadow knocking, not to destroy but to integrate, to add its vitality to your conscious life. The emotional pull here is profound. It's the ache of potential unrealized, the thrill of what could be if you dared to embrace the whole. As we journey further, feel the rhythm building, like a heartbeat quickening in the chest of a runner approaching the peak of a hill, where the view promises to change everything. Envision Jung in his tower at Bollingen, the stone retreat he built with his own hands by the lake, a physical manifestation of his inner world. There, amid the simplicity of carved symbols and flickering candlelight, he practiced active imagination, a technique where one engages in dialogue with inner figures, allowing the unconscious to flow freely. It wasn't mere fantasy, it was a bridge to integration, a way to coax the splintered parts into harmony. One evening, as twilight painted the water in hues of indigo and gold, Jung might have sat by the window, closing his eyes to summon Philemon, his wise old man archetype, a winged figure who imparted wisdom from beyond the veil. Their conversations, recorded in his journals, reveal the human warmth of the process. Doubts voiced, insights challenged, emotions raw and unfiltered. It's this authenticity that draws us in, making Jung not a distant icon, but a fellow traveler whose struggles mirror our own. And in 2026, with advancements in virtual reality, perhaps allowing simulated encounters with our inner archetypes,
The barriers to such dialogues could dissolve, but the essence remains timeless. Integration begins when you initiate the conversation, when silence gives way to vulnerable exchange. The path isn't linear, of course. It's a spiral, descending into depths before ascending with newfound strength. Jung experienced this in his midlife crisis, what he termed the nigredo in alchemical terms, the blackening, the decomposition where ego illusions crumble. Emotions run high here, despair like a heavy fog, confusion swirling like eddies in a river, but threaded with curiosity, that spark of wonder that propels you forward. I felt echoes of this in crafting stories, when characters refused to behave as planned, revealing layers I hadn't anticipated, forcing me to integrate my own shadows into the narrative. For you, in the coming months leading to 2026, it might manifest as a career pivot that terrifies yet excites, or a relationship where honesty uncovers buried truths. The hook pulls taut. What if ignoring this call leads to a life half-lived, shadows growing longer until they eclipse the light? But embracing it, that's where the rhythm shifts to triumph, the emotional peak cresting like a wave about to break. As we approach that peak, let's linger on the sensations, the quickened breath, the tingle of anticipation along the skin. True integration, Jung's secret unveiled, begins not at some arbitrary milestone, but in the decision to turn inward, to map the uncharted territories of the self with compassion rather than judgment. Imagine the alchemical vessel heating, elements merging, shadow and light, anima and ego forging the self, that mandala of wholeness Jung so revered. In his later years, he reflected on this process with a quiet profundity, writing that the individuation journey is the privilege of a lifetime, not for the faint-hearted, but for those willing to endure the fire.
Your 2026 timeline stretches before you, like an open road winding through mist-shrouded mountains, each curve a potential revelation. Perhaps by then, you'll look back on this moment, this video, as the spark that ignited the flame, the subtle hook that drew you into your own epic. Yet the journey demands patience, a slow unfolding like petals in the dawn. Jung warned against forcing integration. It's organic, emerging when the psyche is ready, often triggered by life's synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that feel orchestrated by a greater intelligence. A chance encounter, a dream that lingers upon waking, a book falling open to the perfect page. These are the signposts. Feel the warmth building, the human connection as I share this. In my own life, such moments have arrived unbidden, reshaping my understanding, infusing stories with depth I couldn't fabricate. For you, as 2026 dawns, these synchronicities might multiply, weaving a narrative where integration feels inevitable, the emotional rhythm pulsing with purpose. Now, as the story crests, envision the resolution not as an end, but as a new beginning. True integration begins when you cease the war within, when acceptance blooms like wildflowers after rain. Jung's legacy isn't in abstract theories, but in the lived transformation, the quiet power of a soul aligned. In 2026, your timeline could be the stage for this alchemy, shadows integrated into a luminous whole, radiating authenticity that draws others toward their own awakenings. The air clears, the forest path widens, and you step forward with a heart full, ready for whatever lies ahead. But wait, there's more to unravel in this tapestry. The practical whispers of how to nurture this process in daily life, the subtle exercises Jung himself employed, blended with modern insights that bridge to your future self. As the narration flows on, picture yourself incorporating these, building momentum toward that integrated horizon. One such practice is journaling, not the rote daily log, but a dialogue with the unconscious, where you pour out uncensored thoughts, then respond as if your shadow were speaking back. Imagine the intimacy of that. Pen scratching paper in the soft glow of lamplight, emotions surfacing like bubbles from deep water, anger, joy, sorrow intertwining. Jung did this relentlessly, and it became the bedrock of his integration. In 2026, with digital tools evolving, perhaps AI-assisted reflections will enhance this, but the core remains human, vulnerability laid bare. Another layer is dream work, that nocturnal theater where the psyche stages its dramas. Jung viewed dreams as compensatory, balancing the one-sidedness of waking life. Recall a dream that haunted you, its symbols vivid and perplexing. A labyrinthine house, a pursuing figure, a soaring flight. Integration begins when you engage these, amplifying them through art or meditation, allowing their wisdom to seep into consciousness. The emotional depth here is palpable, a blend of mystery and revelation that keeps you hooked, yearning for more. As we delve further, consider the role of relationships in this secret. Jung saw others as mirrors, projecting our unintegrated parts onto them, the anima in a lover, the shadow in an adversary. True integration sparks when we withdraw those projections, owning what we see in others as our own. It's a poignant process, laced with heartache and growth, like peeling layers of an onion to reveal the tender core. In your 2026 story, imagine relationships transforming, deepened by this awareness, conflicts resolving into profound connections. The rhythm builds again, tension mounting as we explore the collective dimension. Jung believed individual integration contributes to the collective unconscious, healing societal splits. In a world fractured by polarization, your personal work ripples outward, a quiet revolution. Feel the inspiration swelling, the sense of purpose that elevates the narrative. Yet challenges abound. The resistance, the backslides where shadows reassert. Jung himself faced relapses, but persevered with humility. This humanizes the path, making it relatable, emotional highs tempered with realistic lows. Pressing on, let's touch on archetypes beyond the shadow. The hero's journey echoing in your life, the wise elder guiding from within. Integration begins when you embody these, crafting a myth of your own becoming. And as 2026 looms, envision milestones. Perhaps a retreat where silence amplifies inner voices, or a creative project channeling unintegrated energies. The story feels alive, pulsing with possibility. But the depths go further. The mystical side of Jung, his fascination with synchronicity and the unus mundus, the unified world where psyche and matter intertwine. Integration, then, is cosmic, aligning with the universe's rhythm. Emotional peak approaches anew, the realization that you hold the key. The true integration begins with a single, courageous step inward. Reflection settles in, a gentle resolution where wholeness feels attainable, the narrative circling back with warmth. And so the spiral continues, turning ever inward, ever outward, like the breath of the earth itself rising and falling beneath your feet. We left off at the threshold of that quiet resolution, the moment when the war within begins to soften, when the fragments start to remember they were once whole. But wholeness isn't a destination with a welcome mat and a finished sign. It's a living rhythm, a pulse that quickens and slows, sometimes racing with the wild joy of discovery, sometimes dropping into the heavy silence of grief for all the years you spent divided from yourself. Let's walk this next stretch of the path together, slowly, the way Jung himself would have preferred, without hurry,
without the modern compulsion to fix everything in 30 days or less. Picture yourself now, not in some abstract future, but right here, in the soft grey light of a January morning in 2026. Outside your window, the world is waking in its own way. Distant traffic hums like a low chant. Steam rises from a neighbor's tea kettle. A bird calls once, twice, then falls quiet again. Inside, something in you is also stirring. Maybe it's the faint aftertaste of a dream you can't quite grasp, or the way your chest tightens when you think about the year ahead. Not with dread exactly, but with the nervous electricity of something important about to be born. This is where true integration often begins to show its real face. Not in thunderclaps of insight, but in the accumulation of tiny, almost invisible choices. Jung never promised it would feel heroic every day. He knew the psyche works more like a river carving stone, patient, persistent, occasionally flooding its banks, more often just murmuring along the edges, wearing away resistance grain by grain. One of those grains might be the simple act of noticing when you're wearing the persona too tightly. You know the feeling. Shoulders drawn up toward the ears, voice pitched half an octave higher than it wants to be, words chosen not for truth, but for safety. Perhaps it happens at work, in a meeting where everyone nods in agreement, while something inside you screams that the plan is hollow. Or maybe it's in a conversation with a friend, the moment you catch yourself agreeing when every cell is whispering no. Integration begins the instant you notice, and then, instead of judging yourself for the mask, you offer it a small, private bow of recognition. Thank you, persona, for keeping me safe all these years. And now, perhaps we can loosen the straps just a little. Feel that loosening in your body as I say it. Let your shoulders drop half an inch. Let the breath move deeper into the belly. It's such a small gesture, almost laughably insignificant against the enormity of the self Jung described. Yet it is precisely these micro-movements that begin to rewire the nervous system, telling the ancient parts of you that it's safe to come out of hiding. And when the shadow does emerge, because it will, inevitably, in ways both dramatic and mundane, the invitation is not to fight it or analyze it to death, but to sit with it, the way you might sit with a frightened child who's wandered into the room at midnight. No lectures, no demands for explanation, just presence. I see you, you say silently. I've been running from you for a long time. Come, sit here beside me. Tell me what you've been carrying. Sometimes the shadow arrives as rage, a sudden flare of anger at a driver who cut you off, or at a colleague who took credit for your idea. Instead of swallowing it or exploding outward, you pause. You feel the heat in your chest, the clench of the jaw, the way your hands want to make fists. And then, quietly, you ask, what part of me has been denied expression for so long that it must now come out sideways? The answer, when it comes, is rarely comfortable. Maybe it's the part that learned early that anger was dangerous, that being nice was the only way to survive. Maybe it's the creative fire that was shamed into silence. Whatever it is, naming it without judgment begins the integration. The rage doesn't disappear, it simply stops being an enemy. It becomes fuel, direction, a voice that finally has permission to speak. Other times the shadow wears a quieter face. Envy, shame, the dull ache of self-rejection when you scroll past someone else's seemingly perfect life. Here the work is subtler still. You notice the sting, the way your stomach drops, the voice that says you'll never be enough. And instead of spiraling into comparison, you lean closer. You whisper to that hurting place, I'm listening. What are you really afraid of? What do you long for that you believe is impossible for someone like me? The answers that surface in those tender moments often feel like keys turning in locks you didn't know were there. As January deepens into February, as the light begins to lengthen again even in the coldest weeks, these small dialogues start to compound. You might find yourself laughing more easily, at yourself, at the absurdity of how seriously you once took the old masks. You might notice colors appearing brighter, food tasting more vivid, music moving through your body instead of just past your ears. These are not side effects. They are the first signs of blood returning to parts of the psyche that have been starved for decades. Jung spoke often of the transcendent function, the mysterious third thing that arises when opposites are held in tension long enough without forcing a premature resolution. It cannot be willed into being, only prepared for. You prepare the ground by staying with the tension between who you've been and who you sense you could become, between the rational mind that wants control and the irrational depths that refuse it, between the longing for belonging and the equally fierce longing for authenticity. In practical terms, this might look like keeping the journal open on your nightstand, not as a chore, but as a ritual. Some nights you write questions to the unconscious and leave them unanswered, trusting that something will respond in dream or synchronicity. Other nights you draw, crude circles, jagged lines, colors that make no logical sense, yet feel exactly right. You don't need to be an artist. You only need to be willing to let the hand move without censorship. You might also begin to experiment with active imagination in small doses. Find a quiet hour, close your eyes, and invite an inner figure to appear, perhaps the wise elder, perhaps the wounded child, perhaps the fierce guardian who has been protecting the gates for so long. Ask one question only, then listen. The images may come slowly at first, hesitant, like deer stepping into a clearing. Don't chase them. Let them come to you. Write what you see, what you feel, what they say. Over weeks and months, the conversations deepen, the figures become more vivid, the insights more piercing. And through it all runs the golden thread of compassion. Toward yourself first, then inevitably toward others. Because the moment you stop waging war on your own shadow, you lose the need to project it onto the world. People who once triggered you become interesting puzzles instead of threats. Conflicts that used to spiral into destruction become opportunities for understanding. The world doesn't change so much as your eyes change, and suddenly you see the same broken beauty everywhere, in strangers, in systems, in yourself. By the time spring arrives in 2026, something remarkable may have begun to happen. Not perfection. Jung never spoke of perfection, but congruence. A felt sense that the different parts of you are no longer pulling in opposite directions. The inner parliament has stopped shouting over one another and begun, tentatively, to deliberate. Decisions feel less like battles and more like choices made by a whole being. Creativity flows with less resistance. Relationships deepen because you're no longer asking the other person to carry what you refuse to carry yourself. This is the secret Jung guarded so carefully, not because he wanted to keep it hidden, but because he knew it could only be discovered through lived experience. No amount of reading, no number of podcasts or weekend retreats can substitute for the slow, sometimes excruciating, sometimes ecstatic process of turning toward what you've spent a lifetime turning away from. And yet, here we are, you and I, sitting in this shared moment of January 2026, the year stretching ahead like an unpainted canvas. The brushes are in your hand. The colors are already inside you. Every shade of light and dark, every tone of tenderness and ferocity. Integration doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to become all of who you already are. So take the next breath, and then the next. Notice what stirs. Listen. There is no hurry. The self has been waiting for you all this time, patient, ancient, luminous. And it will wait a little longer still. Whenever you're ready, it will meet you exactly where you stand. Feel the rhythm slow down now, like the last notes of a long, beautiful symphony fading into silence, but leaving echoes that stay with you long after. As the winter light of January 10th, 2026 spills across your room in soft, pale gold, you might feel it. That subtle shift inside, the way the body knows before the mind fully catches up.
The integration we've been circling isn't some distant peak on a far mountain. It's happening right here, in the ordinary moments. The way your breath catches when you remember a childhood memory you'd rather forget, or how a stranger's kindness on the street suddenly makes your eyes sting with unexplained gratitude. Jung's secret, the one that hides in plain sight, is that true integration begins the moment you stop waiting for permission. It begins when the question itself, when does it start, turns from intellectual curiosity into a quiet, personal ache. And for you, today, in this precise now, that ache is alive. Think back to those early mornings when the city is still half asleep, minarets calling in the distance, and you sit with your journal or simply stare at the ceiling. The shadow doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slips in through the cracks. The irritation at a delayed message, the envy that flares when a friend shares good news, the old shame that rises like bile when you look at old photos. These aren't failures, they're invitations. Jung would smile at that, pipe in hand, because he knew the psyche is wise. It brings what needs attention exactly when you're strong enough to hold it, even if it feels like too much. In the second half of life, or for many of us, the moment life cracks open the first half's illusions, integration accelerates. Not because time runs out, but because the ego, having built its sturdy house of achievements and roles, finally feels safe enough to open the door to the guests it once feared. The shadow, once terrifying, becomes a weary traveler you've kept waiting too long. You invite it in, offer tea, listen to its stories. And slowly, the room feels bigger, the air lighter. You realize the house was never too small. It was just crowded with unacknowledged parts. By mid-2026, as the year unfolds its own surprises, perhaps a new project that scares and excites you, a conversation that heals an old wound, or simply more nights where dreams feel less like chaos and more like messages, you'll notice the change in small ways. Decisions come with less inner debate. Laughter feels freer. Silence feels companionable instead of lonely. The opposites, light and dark, strength and vulnerability, ambition and surrender, don't cancel each other out anymore. They dance. Jung never said it would be easy. He said it would be worth it. Because on the other side of this long, spiraling path isn't perfection. It's presence. A life where you no longer live half asleep, projecting your unlived parts onto others or punishing yourself for being human. Instead, you walk with all of you, the warrior and the poet, the wounded child and the wise elder, the rage and the tenderness. And in that wholeness, something miraculous happens. You become a quiet force for the same in the world around you. So here we are, at the end that is also a beginning. The forest we entered at the start is still there, but now you know its paths. The trees still whisper, but you can hear your own voice among them. Take this with you today, January 10th, 2026. The integration has already begun. It began the moment you clicked play, the moment you felt that tug,
the moment you ask the question aloud or in the privacy of your heart. Breathe it in, let it settle, and then step forward, gently, fiercely, fully alive. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this resonated, if it stirred something deep, drop a comment, share your own moment of recognition. We're all on this spiral together.